Hi there, welcome back to Atypical Stitches Guide to Cross Stitching. And today I wanted to, this is kind of the floss part 2. And it's really talking about the strands and how we use embroidery floss. I'm going to get into more of how long of a floss you should be cutting, what scissors you should be using, how many strands you should pull out depending on what kind of fabric and what density of its count it is. And so I wanted to break the floss segment into 2 parts for that reason. As you see here, I have all of the flosses that I talked about last time, except for 666 that I put away. And I'm actually going to keep these out of the box because it's what I'm going to use for the entire portion of the demo that I'm going to do throughout these lessons. But for today, I'm going to focus a little bit on the 3810, just because it's the brightest one and really, really easy to see. I also have this handy dandy invisible ruler. I do apologize if it's hard to see, but it is 6 inches long, and so it's more of an explanation of how much space you need. So there are 2 different ways of starting an embroidery floss stitch, and I'm actually going to go into both of them once I start in on how to actually do the cross stitch. The most basic one involves an 18-inch length of thread. So for today, or floss, I'm gonna use that. So the general rule is either 18 inches, or because you can't see my whole arm, if you start from your elbow and go to your wrist, that length is ideal. So for me, that's actually a little longer than 18 inches. It's probably closer to 24 if I measure that out. And so that's the length I'll be using today. It's a little longer than 18 inches, maybe 20. So we have a cut strand of floss here. And once you have that cut strand, you really don't need any of the rest of your flosses. Now, I briefly touched on this last time, but I always recommend really having embroidery scissors. Embroidery scissors have a sharp tip, and that is useful for about 1,000 different reasons, but they're also really small. And you can carry them anywhere. So yes, you can have teeny tiny blunt tipped scissors, but as we move on through the tutorials, I think you'll see how beneficial these pointy tipped scissors are. So I'm just going to recommend, if you're going out and you're buying all of the things right now, just get pointy tipped scissors. Don't, I'll get into more of why later. So last time I talked about how embroidery floss is actually 6 strands of thread. And when I'm talking about pulling a thread out, I call them strands. So we have floss made out of strands. And how you pull these out is actually really simple. Because this is mercerized cotton, it's heat treated, and so it's not likely to catch. And this is one thing that you can tell the difference of the quality of embroidery floss you have. If you buy embroidery floss from the dollar store, doing this next trick is going to be real hard. I know. So all I do is I hold the full strand here loosely with my finger, and I have one strand here, and the whole thing comes out. It's just that simple. What you'll notice at the end behind your fingers, and I'll try to focus more on what's going on back here while I pull this next one, you'll see it kind of just bunch up, but it unfurls really, really easily. And so if you have a bundle of embroidery floss, that's all you have to do. Just pull these threads out. They're going to come out real easily. Now the question is, how much floss to use? And that is dependent on what your project is. When I first started cross stitching, I started on, I think it's probably a 12 count. It was really basic, and it was like, always use 3 strands all the time. This was bad advice. Your amount of floss, your amount of strands, is going to differ from project to project depending on the count of your aida. In fact, what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to take these and I'm going to do a demo on my aida that I have sitting around of what it looks like when you use 1, 2, 3, etc. And then we can talk a little bit more about how those look and how to decide how much you're going to use. All right, I'm back. That took a couple of minutes. And I want to talk about why we change how many strands we use. The number of strands you use on a given project is going to depend on the count of the cloth that you're using and the size of the needle. Now, like I talked about in the needles episode, each size of needle has a different eye. And that eye is going to depend how many pieces of floss you can fit through it. I can fit 6 strands through this eye of this needle, which is a full strand of floss or a full piece of floss, but it was hecka hard. So here is some 14 count aida, and what I've done is I've done 4 groups. And I'm going to talk about why I didn't do 6 here in a second. But I'm going to zoom in a little bit and talk about each one. So here I've gone 1 strand, 2 strands, 3 strands, and 6 strands. I didn't do 4 or 5 because I've never seen 4 or 5 recommended ever. So if you have, let me know, but I've never seen it. And you can really see the difference here. With 1 strand on 14 count, it looks pretty bad. You can barely see what's going on. There are definitely X's. It's very thin to look at. But if I pull up my 25 count here, this is single strand embroidery. This is single strand cross stitch, and you can't tell. So you can really see the difference between 1 strand on 14 and 1 strand on 25 count, and why you would change like from one to the other. But the question is, why wouldn't you use more? Here's 2 strand, and you can see a distinct X here, and there's a little bit of space. So this gives the traditional cross stitch look for some people, and they really, really like it. On 3 strands, it fully fills in the box. You can see the X, but it's not like distinctly an X like it is here. And on 6 strand, it looks kind of the same as 3 strand, but let me tell you, this was really hecka hard to do, and I don't think I'll ever do it again. I only want to do it for illustration, and you might not be able to see it in the video, but it's very bumpy, it's not even, it's not great. So when I'm sending out kits for 14 count, I usually include 3 strands per stitch. And when I'm sending them out for 18 count, I include 2 strands per stitch. Because on 18 count, a 2 strand looks more like this than it does for this. But a 1 strand would look more like this. And so if you're buying for your own purpose, the rule is if it is below 18, I would recommend 3 strands. So I would say below 14. So 14 and below, I recommend 3 strands. I would guess that if you get into, say, 10 count, 8 count, and you're actually using floss and not yarn, I would recommend a full 6. If you're going to do 16 to probably 22, I'd recommend 2. And anything above 24, I would go with a single strand. And that's going to make a huge difference in how easy it is to make your stitch, how professionally done your finished product is, how smooth it is, and just a whole bunch of other things. So I really wanted to show you the difference between each one of those and explain why it's really, really important. And I'll put up a little chart on my website that explains how to determine that once this all goes live. So until next time we're actually going to finish this. So this is all of your tools. We have talked about cloth. We have talked about needles. We've talked about scissors. We've talked about hoops. We've talked about floss. And so that's all of the things you need. So if you are ready to start your next project, and you want to use the demo chart that I'm going to be talking about, you can pop over to my website at atypicalstitches.com, and it's under the free tab, listed as Don't Make Me Cut You. And my next video will actually be about how to get a chart, how to use a digital chart, how to use a physical chart, and some softwares that will help you do all of that. And once we finish that, we're going to move into actually how to do the cross stitch part. So I'm hoping you're enjoying this, and stay tuned for some more. Until next time, keep your stitches tight, and I will see you then.